Tonight on Reporting Scotland, the former Health Secretary Michael Matheson is suspended from Parliament. Mr Matheson breached Holyrood's expenses policy over an £11,000 iPad data bill. He'll be banned for 27 sitting days and will have his pay docked. Also on tonight's programme, a mother whose 16-year-old son fell victim to online sexual extortion is calling for social media companies to do more to prevent it happening again.
I want to get justice for my boy, and I want the social media platforms to start having accountability and having a duty of care to our young people.
And we speak to people trialling sensors that could support independent living for longer.
And in sport, we'll have pictures from the Scotland Hotel as the players arrive for their training camp with the Euros just 2 weeks away.
Hello, I'm Laura Miller. Welcome to Wednesday's programme. The former Health Secretary, Michael Matheson, has been suspended from Holyrood for 27 sitting days and docked 54 days' pay after breaching the MSP's code of conduct over an £11,000 iPad data bill. The Scottish Parliament's chamber voted in favour of the sanctions this afternoon, but SNP MSPs did not support the punishment and called for the complaints process to be reviewed, arguing it was open to bias and prejudice. Throughout the day, there had been confusion about what the SNP would do. Our political correspondent Kirsten Campbell has more.
The Conservatives are clear that Michael Matheson should quit Holyrood in the row over his parliamentary iPad.
If someone is found to have falsely claimed £11,000 from their employer, in this case the taxpayer, then they lied about it as part of a cover-up, they would have been sacked.
The former Health Secretary used his expenses to cover a huge data roaming bill racked up on a foreign holiday. He didn't immediately own up that his sons had used it as a hotspot to watch football. After he was found to have broken expenses rules, the Standards Committee concluded he should have his wages docked and be banned from parliamentary proceedings for more than 5 weeks.
The SNP think that's harsh, and there was confusion within the ranks about whether or not they were going to back the sanctions. In a general election, in the middle of a cost of living crisis, defending a politician who's been cavalier with taxpayers' cash has raised more than a few eyebrows.
In the end, the punishment was agreed, but without SNP support, amid concerns the committee had prejudged the outcome.
I've said that I accept the conclusion of Parliament. I don't accept the process that's been applied here because I fear for other members of Parliament who might put a foot wrong and something like this happens and there's a prejudicial process. I wouldn't like that done to me, so why should I turn a blind eye when it's done to somebody else?
Labour benefited when the electorate backed a recall petition forcing a by-election in Rutherglen. The party thinks the same rules should apply for misdemeanours at Holyrood too.
I think it's completely unacceptable that we hold MSPs to a lower standard than MPs at Westminster. We all know the huge issues around integrity and decency and standards in public life at Westminster, but we should be holding Holyrood to at least an equal standard, if not a higher standard.
The Lib Dems think Michael Matheson should resign.
I therefore believe it would only be right for Michael Matheson to act voluntarily here, as he would be required to act by law in Westminster. He should step down so that a by-election can be held.
MSPs will now have to review the way they handle complaints after imposing the toughest sanction ever. Michael Matheson says he regrets the situation. He won't be back at Holyrood till September. Kirsten Campbell, Reporting Scotland, Holyrood.
Well, let's get the thoughts of our political correspondent, Lindsay Bewes, who's at Holyrood for us tonight. And Lindsay, not the start to the general election campaign John Swinney would have wanted, presumably.
Well, indeed, Laura, and John Swinney said this certainly wasn't part of his campaign plan. But look, he said he'd had to play the ball as it lands, and he just didn't believe the process had been fair. But there is a question over the wisdom of spending so much political capital defending a colleague who was ultimately in the wrong, and the optics of how that looks to the public. And the Scottish Conservatives, well, they've seized on this issue. They've already done 2 Michael Matheson-themed photo calls on the election trail already. already this week. They say this issue is having real cut-through with the voters on the doorsteps. And Scottish Labour say this is now a general election issue because John Swinney has put integrity at the heart of his campaign. But they say he's undermined the integrity of the Scottish Parliament. But look, despite the political battles in the chamber and out on the campaign trail, there is a chink of consensus emerging, rather ironically, because the parties now agree that a process of recall is needed at Holyrood that would effectively allow constituents to sack their MSP in the event of wrongdoing.
OK, Lindsay Bewes at Holyrood, thank you. The mother of a 16-year-old boy who took his own life after being targeted by online blackmailers has called on social media companies to do far more to protect young people from ruthless criminals. Murray Dowie from Dunblane died 6 months ago after falling victim to what's known as sextortion, sexual extortion online. His mother, Ros, has been speaking to our Home Affairs correspondent, David Cowan.
The National Crime Agency, Britain's version of the FBI, has warned that more and more teenagers like Murray Dowie are falling prey to online blackmail. His parents are hoping his story will act as a warning to others and compel the authorities and big tech companies to take action.
Really, Murray went to bed as normal one night, and then from what I understand, he was contacted on Instagram by someone claiming to be a girl. He got chatting with her. He shared an intimate picture with her, and then it became clear it wasn't a girl, it was criminals, we think, in Nigeria, who tried to extort money out of him and obviously hounded him and got him into an absolute frenzy and panic that he thought his life was over and the only thing he could do was take his own life.
And this happened within a space of...
A few hours, yeah. I think he went up to his room about 9:30, and then we found him dead the next morning. It was just the most horrific thing that's ever happened to me. I mean, I just walked into his room as normal, chatting to him as I walked in, and found him. So just devastating and horrific, yeah.
I will be giving you guys how you can start blackmailing.
Globally, sextortion is a growing threat. The BBC has found guides on social media showing people how to do it. Suspects are being identified. Gangs based in West Africa, mainly Nigeria, are thought to be responsible. This man is accused of being part of a group which has made £2 million from its victims. Murray's death at his home in Dunblane is the subject of an international investigation.
Police Scotland have been fantastic. They've been really supportive and kept us in touch. Where we're frustrated now is it very much seems to be stuck with Nigeria. Information's been sent to Nigeria via the National Crime Agency, and the National Crime Agency are working with Nigerian authorities, but there seems to be no progress being made. You know, it's 5 months in and there's none. And similarly, in the American side, Meta have been given a court order to release data, and that court order, which took ages to get in itself, was served on them on the 1st of May, and we still don't have the data from Meta.
Ros and her husband Mark plan to join forces with the parents of other children who've taken their lives, working together to force social media companies to do far more to protect young people.
The last conversation I had with Murray about this sort of thing, he literally rolled his eyes at me and said, "I'm not stupid." So have the conversation, but I wish what we'd had the conversation was more around, well, if it does happen, this is what you need to do, because it didn't occur to us it was going to happen to us. You know, I want to get justice for my boy, and I want the social media platforms to start having accountability and having a duty of care to our young people.
Well, Dave's here now. Dave, a truly awful story, every parent's worst nightmare. But what are the big tech companies saying and, more importantly, doing about this?
Well, clearly the threat is very well known and has been for some time. Just 4 weeks ago, the National Crime Agency issued an alert to every teacher in the UK, telling them what to look out for and giving them advice on how they can help children if it happens to them. The BBC has statements today from a number of the tech companies. Meta, which owns Instagram, says people under 18 in the UK are defaulted into private accounts when they sign up, which means that their followers and their lists of people who they're following are hidden. Snapchat says it has a reporting option specifically for threats involving the leaking of sexual content and an in-app education for teenagers, it says. TikTok claims to be designed to be, quote, inhospitable for those intent on causing harm to teens. On that point about what you should do if it does happen, the advice from the National Crime Agency is don't pay, stop the contact with the person who's trying to blackmail you, block them, and then avoid deleting anything which could be used in evidence later on.
OK, Dave, good to have that reminder of that advice. Thank you. And if you have been affected by sextortion, you'll find details of help and support on the Victims of Crime page at bbc.co.uk/actionline. Some of the day's other stories now. And the Scottish Parliament will be asked to approve the early release of around 550 prisoners in a bid to address unprecedented overcrowding. The figure makes up around 7% of the Scottish prison population. The legislation was announced by the Justice Secretary earlier this month. Prisoners will be released in 4 tranches from the end of June. Those serving a life sentence or those on the sex offenders register will not be eligible for release, with further exclusions also applying to other groups. A 28-year-old man has been arrested in connection with a fatal crash in Edinburgh involving a bin lorry and a schoolboy. 11-year-old Thomas Wong had been at Whitehouse Road in Barnton on the morning of Friday the 1st of March when the crash happened. He died at the scene. Police Scotland says inquiries to establish the full circumstances continue. Nicola Sturgeon has apologised for not meeting a target to dual the A9 by 2025. The former First Minister appeared in front of a Holyrood committee to give evidence into the government's delayed programme. She said Brexit and the pandemic had slowed the process and that government should have been more open about the challenges the project faced. Ministers admitted in February last year that the 2025 target was unachievable. And the Saxavord spaceport officially opened this afternoon. The site in Unst is Western Europe's first fully licensed vertical launch space centre, having received licences from the Civil Aviation Authority in December 2023 and April this year. The first launch is to take place this summer by a German rocket company. Engine tests are underway, with the UK government investing £10 million in the project. Now, some homeless people have been moved out of temporary accommodation in Edinburgh because Taylor Swift fans have booked rooms ahead of the council. Shelter Scotland has said several homeless people it supports have been sent by taxi to Aberdeen and Glasgow amid a shortage of places to stay. Well, our reporter Morag Kinneborough has been following the story for us. Morag, what's happened then?
So in this housing emergency in Edinburgh, there's simply not enough places for people to stay. The City Council has a legal duty to provide places for people who become homeless. And when it doesn't have enough of its own accommodation, it sometimes has to use kind of overflow, if you like, hotels, guest houses, bed and breakfast, tourist accommodation. But in the summer, especially during the festival, there's often not enough room, and what seems to be happening here with Taylor Swift coming to perform 3 sold-out gigs at Murrayfield Stadium in the weekend after next, first weekend of June. Tens of thousands of people are coming to the city for them. They booked accommodation months ago. Edinburgh Council only books its overflow accommodation, if you like, a week in advance. Shelter Scotland has said that some of the clients it looks after and supports have been moved to Glasgow and Aberdeen, sometimes driven by taxi. One person even offered accommodation in Newcastle, which they declined. But Shelter Scotland says it's a blatant injustice, in their words, that homeless people are pitted in direct competition with tourists.
OK, so what's the council said then?
Well, Edinburgh Council has stressed it is absolutely not, in its words, moving tenants out of temporary accommodation to make way for Taylor Swift fans. Its housing and homeless convener has said this is a symptom of the housing emergency. It has to use overflow accommodation, sometimes in tourism accommodation places like hotels, and it can't find that accommodation during the busy summer spells. So it uses that only reluctantly and only as a very last resort. It's aware of this current situation and says it's trying to find appropriate alternative accommodation.
OK, Morag in Edinburgh, thank you. Now, should mobile phones be banned in school? The case for this. Constant notifications are a distraction. Phones can be misused. The case against, they can be useful research tools. They are how we communicate. Well, it's a very live conversation at the moment. Right now, it's up to individual head teachers, but the Scottish Government is about to publish new guidance on the issue. Our reporter Suzanne Allen has been to a secondary school in Glasgow where phones in the classroom are already a thing of the past.
So they built this ship and they said, oh, you're never going to be able to sink this.
The story of Titanic is always popular with Siobhan Healy's S1 English class. She's an experienced teacher with a friendly, engaging manner. Despite this, before the ban, no matter what the topic was, there were always pupils who were preoccupied by their phones.
It's a massive problem. It's distracting. There's never a time really where you've got their full attention if the phone is there. You hear Snapchat pings happening. You quite often are talking to the tops of heads and you know that they've got their phone underneath the desk or behind a book.
In most primary and secondary schools in Scotland, there are not supposed to be any mobile phones in class, unless as a teaching aid. But pupils often seem to find a way around this. In January, All Saints decided to trial a ban on mobiles in class, but allow them at break and lunchtime. Any student caught with one in the classroom is asked to put it away. If this doesn't happen, it goes in a box until the end of the period.
I feel like I can put it down, but it does hold a lot of a personal part of my life.
A lot of people used to use the phones and now they're scared that their phone is going to be taken off, so they don't use it as much.
So could there be different types of ban? A full ban on bringing them to school, so that would mean no making calls or texting or social media at break or lunch. Or would it be a ban, like All Saints, where they can't be used in class but are allowed at break? The head teacher here is happy with the way it's worked so far.
Hasn't eradicated it, but it's made mobile phones, I suppose it's brought a bit of a realisation, made more explicit that mobile phones can be contra learning, and that's a good narrative to have in the school.
The Scottish Government is issuing advice on this soon. We will shortly bring forward refreshed guidance on the use of mobile phones. As a starting point for this guidance, head teachers should be empowered to take any action they deem necessary, including banning mobile phone use. Indeed, many head teachers have already chosen to do so within their school communities.
Some people...
What All Saints Secondary have done is working for them. We'll need to wait and see if others follow suit. Suzanne Allen, reporting Scotland, Glasgow.
Now, many of us are familiar with smart meters to monitor our energy use, but what if they could be used to help us live independently for longer? Well, a group of elderly people are trialling a device that triggers an alert if energy use patterns in the home suddenly change, which could indicate a fall or even early signs of dementia, as our science and innovation correspondent Laura Goodwin explains.
At 94 years old, Alan Fraser remains proudly independent. He's lived alone at his home in Buckie for the past 7 years. He's currently trialling a system that allows family to check on him without invading his privacy. And it starts with his regular morning cup of tea.
I have said that I'll be doing certain things, like, well, simply getting up in the morning and switching the kettle on. They know, and within this scheme, they know whether I have done that or not.
Discrete devices are monitoring Alan's electricity usage. If the system identifies anomalies in his patterns, that triggers an alert.
And this little thing here is transmitting the electrical use back to the University of Edinburgh, and that's where all the magic happens. Essentially, that's where the alerts start coming out. So if someone has unfortunately taken a fall, this little thing could be saving a life.
Great to see that very sprightly 94-year-old.
For Alan's son Keith, it's been a good way to keep an eye on his dad, even though he's far away.
I can see it immediately applicable to so many people's lives who maybe have a loved one that they don't necessarily want to be overtly monitoring, but it just lets them know that they're doing their normal day-to-day thing.
So far, the system has been tested in 19 homes and has already helped another participant during a medical emergency.
They had a cardiac issue in the evening, which meant they were unconscious in their bed. And what happened was the system didn't register them having dinner. They didn't see any kind of signature from the devices. An alert went out to one of their neighbours. The neighbour had a key to the property, came round and found the lady unconscious on her bed.
The trial will continue for another 6 months, but it's hoped the technology could be made more widely available within a year, helping to keep more people in their homes for longer.
It's a hands-off in a way. You know, it's there, it's... Big Brother's watching you.
But not too much.
Not too much.
Alan Fraser there talking to our correspondent Laura Goodwin. OK, well, let's get tonight's sport now with Amy Irons. 2 weeks to go.
The countdown is on, Laura, is indeed towards the Euros. Thanks very much. Hello there. Yeah, the clock continues to tick down towards the start of the Euros. And today marked a bit of a milestone in Scotland's preparations as the squad met up at their pre-tournament hotel. These pictures have just come in of the players arriving in Glasgow city centre, including Liverpool teenager Ben Doak. You'll get a look at him. There he is. A squad of 28 has assembled, but manager Steve Clarke will have to cut that down to 26 before the tournament begins. There's former Celtic teammates Kieran Tierney and James Forrest having a catch-up. What we really want to know is what's in the bin bags, I'm sure. Craig Gordon and Liam Kelly, they'll both be hoping to make the journey to Germany, not just to Glasgow. And they've been joined by Premiership Player of the Year, Lawrence Shankland, making his way in there. Well, it's a pretty packed schedule from now on. The squad will have their first training session at Lesser Hampden tomorrow morning. That will be their base before they head out to Germany. After a few days of training, the squad may then head to Portugal for a friendly against Gibraltar next Monday. Then it is straight back to Scotland for their final match before the Euros and what I'm sure will be a great send-off when they take on Finland at Hampden. 2 days after that, the squad will then fly out to Munich and make their way to the team hotel in the alpine town of Garmisch, where they'll finalise their preparations for the Euros curtain raiser, Germany against Scotland, Friday, the 14th of June. Turning our attention to rugby now then, and Edinburgh flanker Jamie Ritchie says being dropped as Scotland captain was one of his biggest disappointments in the sport, but he is backing himself to recapture his best form. Some injuries and a loss of form led head coach Gregor Townsend to strip Ritchie of the role for the Six Nations, but he did play in the tournament and has featured regularly for his club side as the domestic season draws to a close.
For me, it's been a pretty smooth ride, and rugby's can be quite an up and down. So, for me, I'm just kind of looking at it as a little bit of a challenge to overcome, and hopefully get myself back into the mix. But I think it was a challenge, but in real life terms, these things, they come around, and it's about how you kind of conduct yourself in and around the place. And I'm proud of how I did that.
And you can hear more from Jamie Ritchie on the Scottish Rugby podcast on BBC Sounds. Now, diver Grace Reid says making it to her third Olympics would be her greatest achievement after spending the last few years questioning her future in the sport. The Scot, who won a silver medal in the women's 3-metre springboard at the British Championships last weekend, is in contention to be included when the Team GB diving squad is announced next month. The 28-year-old from Edinburgh says to have fallen back in love with her sport after disappointment at the last Olympics in Tokyo is huge for her.
It's always emotional because I wasn't quite sure where I wanted to be in this world, let alone diving. So to 3 years later be in a position where I've fallen back in love with my sport and myself is huge. And as I said at the weekend, it's testament to the army of people behind me that have helped me figure that out and piece me back together. I didn't think 3 years ago I would even be involved in the sport anymore. So to have come back and have made it to the end of, I suppose, an Olympic cycle and love my sport and love what I do and feel happy with my performances is just a huge achievement in and of itself. If I was to qualify for Paris this summer, I think that for me will be one of my biggest personal victories. And I think, I'm proud of who I am in and out the pool. And that's something that in my late 20s, I think that's pretty incredible to say. So I think it would definitely be up there, but I think it's easy to forget how much I've done. So I don't almost want to negate some of the other stuff. But it's hard because, I have achieved a lot, but I think that's part of the reason as I kept going is I didn't feel done and I still wanted more. And as long as that fire is still within me, then I think I will have a place in this sport.
Isn't that just brilliant to see, Laura, from 3 years ago,
Yeah.
not wondering if she would still be in the sport now, to then medalling the British Championships?
Yeah, she's definitely one to watch, isn't she?
Absolutely.
I keep saying this, but we have got such a summer of sport ahead of us, don't we?
We do. Here for all of it.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. OK, now let's go over to Stephen Jardine to find out what's happening on Debate Night.
With the general election campaign now underway, Debate Night is in Kirkcaldy for the first time this evening, a key target seat. Our studio audience here will put their questions this evening to the Deputy Leader of Scottish Labour, Jackie Baillie, MSP, the co-leader of the Scottish Greens, Lorna Slater, MSP, Liberal Democrat MP, Christine Jardine, SNP MP, Tommy Shepherd, and the Scottish Conservatives, Luke Graham. That's Debate Night with me on the BBC Scotland channel, 10:30, or a little bit later on BBC One Scotland.
I'm sure those seats will be filled up later. OK, let's get the weather now with Chris. Oh dear.
Yes, ominous looking skies there. We've had some really torrential downpours across parts of the country today. More on the way as well, Laura. Thank you very much indeed. Very good evening to you. Yes, we've had some really torrential rain across parts of the country today. Some thunder and hail in the mix at times too. This is the satellite and radar from earlier. You can see this rash of showers working their way south and eastwards. And there's still a few more to come because we have a Met Office yellow warning out until 9 p.m. Those thunderstorms still with us for the next few hours, but watch what happens actually. They sort of merge into a longer spell of rain. So from 9 p.m. and overnight, a second Met Office yellow warning for heavy rain through parts of Clackmannanshire, Stirling, Perthshire, Fife, Edinburgh, the Lothians and the Borders. That heavy rain as we head overnight falling on already saturated ground. So once again, the chance of some localised flooding as a result of that. And it hangs around for most of the night. By dawn, it's on its way out. Elsewhere, cloudy with a few showers and temperatures in town, 8 to 11 Celsius. Tomorrow, and today's low pressure is pulling away eastwards, allowing high pressure to move in from the Atlantic. So it's a drier day tomorrow, a brighter day, and for many a warmer day. There'll be some spells of sunshine developing on and off through the course of Thursday. Perhaps a little more in the way of cloud towards the extreme east coast with a bit of rain here. Elsewhere, though, sunny spells and a few showers are set to develop, but not the heavy and thundery showers that we had today. Avoid the showers and we'll see temperatures up to around 19 degrees. Always that bit cooler around the coast and across the Isles. Bit of a breeze coming in from the north as well. You'll really notice that around the north and the northwest coast and across the Northern Isles and parts of the North Sea coast as well. Tomorrow evening, those showers with us for a time and then fading away to leave things largely dry. That takes us to Friday and that ridge of high pressure still with us. So plenty of sunshine actually first thing. Then through towards the afternoon, cloud thickening across the north, sunshine holding on further south, highs of 19. And the weekend doesn't look too bad. Mostly dry with some sunshine, clouding over on Sunday, but in the best of the sunshine, highs of 19 or 20 degrees. That's the forecast for now. Laura.
I like that last bit. Thanks, Christopher. And that is Reporting Scotland for now. Anne McAlpine will have your late news around 10:30 tonight. Until then, from everyone on the team right across the country, do have a very good evening. Good night.